Hello, everyone. I hope you're all enjoying the 2020 fal.con virtual conference so far. But before we get started, here is a quick reference to any forward-looking statements that may exist in this presentation. I'll give you a few seconds here to take a quick screenshot if you wish to review that offline, and then we'll move on. Okay, so welcome to this session titled Securing Your Industrial Operations with the Power of Dragos and CrowdStrike. My name is Matt Cowell, and we're going to cover three main topics today. In this session, we're going to cover the industrial environment, basically give you an overview of what that means, what it looks like, and more importantly, how that's different from traditional enterprise environments, specifically from a cybersecurity standpoint. We're also going to talk about the threats to industrial operations. They're a little bit different, and then talk about the impact of that. And then we're going to cover 5 basic recommendations to help you on your journey to secure your industrial facilities. So quick personal introduction to myself. My name is Matt Cowell. I've been in the industrial space for over 20 years. I started out as a controls engineer and have served various industries within that time. For the last 3 years, I've been at Dragos leading our business development efforts. For those of you unfamiliar with Dragos, I'll also give you a quick introduction to the company. Dragos is a cybersecurity company focused on protecting industrial systems. So we really have a three-pronged approach to do that. We first and foremost have our technology platform called the Dragos Platform. That's going to provide you with visibility of your industrial environment so you understand the assets that reside there, help you discover any threat activities, but more importantly, enable incident response when that occurs. Additionally, we also have our Dragos Worldview ICS threat intelligence offering. That is a group of analysts that are dedicated to tracking adversaries that target ICS. We learn their behaviors and we share that with our subscriber base. And then we also have a services company. We pride ourselves on having a very experienced ICS services team that can perform not just proactive assessments, but also reactive assessments in the form of incident response. Now, the worldview and the services capabilities are also self-serving. We try to codify as much of that OT experience from our team, whether it be detections with behavior analytics on the worldview side or on the services side, human readable playbooks to help you guide that experience through incident response. Also, I'd like to point out here, there's a lot of synergy between Dragos and CrowdStrike. They have a very similar model by having a technology platform that is powered by intelligence, but also supported by services, with the main difference being that we are exclusively focused on industrial operations. So let's talk a little bit about industrial control systems, or ICS, as you may hear me refer to. Sometimes you'll also hear the term OT to distinguish operational technology. That's to distinguish against informational technology or your traditional enterprise environment. Basically, physical processes being controlled by automation. And this automation is used to control a lot of physics that the underpinning for a lot of infrastructure we use today. The electric power that we consume is going to be generated and distributed using a lot of industrial controls. The water that we consume is being treated and delivered to us using industrial automation. And so we're trying to safeguard and protect those systems because they're a little bit different than your traditional enterprise. Now, these are heavily engineered systems, so it stands to reason that the approach you need to take also needs to mirror that same level of engineering. And it's also worth highlighting here that disruption to industrial control systems can be heavily consequential. The physics of these plants can be manipulated for malicious intent that could cause physical damage, but more importantly, human safety. It could impact human safety negatively. The other way to think of it is OT systems have a very different risk profile than those of traditional IT systems, and the right touch is required. So let's talk about some of the industry challenges facing your typical ICS environment. So there's going to be heavy emphasis on safety and uptime. Those are 2 KPIs that are very dominant in this space. And that sometimes comes at the cost of cybersecurity controls. It basically becomes a risk-based decision. For example, patching can lead to an interruption of operations to mitigate risk that may have been a relatively low risk with that vulnerability being in play in the first place. So because these are heavily engineered systems, patching is very complicated. We try to patch frequently and often in IT, and in OT, you have to wait for more of a testing and validation cycle between the vendor and your own internal sandboxing. Also, these systems have very long system long system life cycles. So you're expecting these systems to be in place for 10 to 15 plus years, in contrast to your traditional IT, where you may be looking to replace technology within a 3 to 5 year window. That means you end up with a lot of legacy systems out there. Also, we have a very relaxed approach to monitoring, or traditionally have. Cybersecurity has always been bolt on. So there's not really been a level of mass collection and forensics available in ICS that we've come accustomed to in the enterprise domain. It's also worth highlighting that a lot of industrial control systems use this legacy technology and legacy protocols, and security was never really designed in. So there's a lot of insecure by design. You'll hear that term within this space to define that there's some very fundamental controls missing from ICS systems. Authentication being a great example of one of those. And it's also worth highlighting here digital transformation. There is a lot of business drivers pushing for operations plants to be more interconnected, greater than they've ever have been before, for legitimate business drivers. It might be for remote support, and that's been especially highlighted during these times of quarantine, but also for gathering KPIs and just general system efficiencies overall. So let's talk a little bit about the threats to industrial control system. First of all, I'm going to focus on the untargeted side. Untargeted is less significant, but has been largely impactful because of that delayed patching cycle. And that was really emphasized with the MS-1710 vulnerabilities. A lot of ransomware that was deployed at scale impacted ICS because of that delayed patching, and therefore caused some significant outages to a number of industrial companies within different vertical markets. However, the more specific threat that I want to address is more on the targeted side. And that's your heavily financed, very capable teams, possibly APT, nation state type, but they have a motivation and a goal and are actively targeting industrial control systems. Now, a lot of time they're going to leverage internet connectivity, try to pivot through enterprise to get into OT to cause some kind of disruption. But there are a number of other vectors that could be used. And also, we've seen an increase in e-criminal activity, what we refer to as big game hunting in the context of, if I have ransomware and I have a very large company that is dependent, their financial profitability is going to be dependent on maintaining operations and revenue, and I can target that, I can justify a very high ransom and potentially get that paid by impacting very critical operations. And then it's also worth noting that, as with any other industry, there's always that ever-present insider threat. But I want to focus more on impact. Impact is really where things get different in ICS. First of all, credibility. If you're providing a service, you're providing a product, and you're unable to do so, your customers are going to perceive that as in a negative manner. More importantly, though, that's going to be reflected in your financials. So if your inability to turn around product and therefore bring in revenue, you are going to have some very difficult questions that you're going to have to answer under that circumstance. Moving more into long-term consequences, espionage or IP theft. If you have a very specialty solution that you're providing, maybe a certain recipe or a batch, or the way that you manufacture that product is very bespoke, and someone's able to steal that, now that's going to be available in the domain for competitors to use that to negative advantage to yourself. The other thing is disruption, just disruption to operations. If you are a power utility, you are measured at your performance and your uptime. And if you're unable to deliver power and you have any outages, that's going to cause a lot of heavy disruption to other businesses that are dependent upon that. And then more importantly, the one I want to emphasize the most, and this was evident with the Triton-Trisis attacks, is that adversaries can go as far as to impact human safety with the capabilities and the objectives. So in the case of Triton-Trisis, a safety system which is designed to protect human life was targeted and impacted, and had that have been a successful campaign, could have had significant consequence to human life. It's also worth kind of highlighting the differences between IT and OT. This is not an exhaustive list, but there are some examples here I want to touch on. So, looking at endpoints, the diversity of endpoints in OT is quite broad. You're going to have your traditional enterprise stuff, your PCs, your printers, your tablets, and so on, but you're also going to have very specific specialized embedded devices. And that means your approach to protecting and understanding those systems are going to require that level of diversity to be recognized. Vulnerability scanning. Vulnerability scanning can be very negative in OT. It can actually knock over systems because they may have a lightweight network stack and may not have the capability to respond to vulnerability probes while performing their desired function. Whereas in the IT space, that's obviously a lot more commonplace. Patching, again, I mentioned this before, but patching in IT, the general model of patch often and frequently and as quick as you can is still very present. On the OT side, less so. You're going to see delayed patching, Typically, you need to have your vendor approve it, and then you may want to conduct some independent testing of your own. I've actually experienced this as a controls engineer when a piece of test equipment was, a patch was deployed overnight, actually broke the communications driver, and I wasn't aware of that, so my root cause analysis didn't factor that in, and I spent a number of hours trying to troubleshoot something that was relatively easily fixed by undoing that patch. Internet connectivity, very present in IT. A lot of cloud-based technology is very popular. In OT, less so, or at least it's structured so that you don't have that persistent internet connection. Maybe perhaps through a DMZ or jump host is more the desired approach there. Encryption as well, very commonplace in IT, both in rest and in transit. In OT, less so. I would say I see more maybe encryption at rest than in transit, but some industrial protocols are supporting that in transit, but the deployment of that is relatively light, which does actually make for a more effective monitoring. And then also I want to highlight the main priority. In IT security, generally the main focus of your protection is protecting the data, whereas on the OT side, it's protecting the safety and availability of the systems that you are dependent upon. So what can we do to advance cybersecurity and protect our operations? Well, the first thing I would suggest is you want to assess your own maturity. There are various levels of maturity in this space, depending on the vertical that you may be serving and the size of your organization. But first of all, you need to understand what your existing company capabilities are, then start to define what your goals are going to be and an appropriate timeline to do that. Now, I've suggested two models here to help you with that, the SAND sliding scale of cybersecurity, and also a model provided by ARC. And these serve as very effective tools to communicate to other stakeholders where you're at, to self-assess, understand where you are, but more importantly, justify investments to fulfill any gaps that may exist. Moving on to best practice number 2. So to address that gap, I've broken this down into really 3 main domains: people, technology, and process. And there are inevitably going to be gaps across all of these 3 domains. So do you have the right staff on hand? If you don't, what skills do you need in future? Are there any support agreements you can leverage or partners that may be able to fulfill any gaps you have? And then on the technology side, what is it that I have? What is it I'm trying to protect? What collection is available to me today? And what technology can I implement to help me on this journey? And then more importantly, process, making sure that you have process to leverage the people and the technology in the right manner. And these have to be consensus based. There are a lot of different stakeholders involved in OT cybersecurity. So making sure everyone is aware that the processes exist. And more importantly, they understand their role and they can commit to operating in that manner. Moving on to best practice number 3. So be proactive. There's a commonly used quote here from Benjamin Franklin. I think it's actually quite relevant here because I think the investment that you make up front is going to have significant impact down the road. And Benjamin Franklin is the face on the highest banknote in circulation. So I think it's a very worthy analogy, but you need to understand your environment. You need to understand your weaknesses. And to do that, you have to be proactive. You have to ask questions. You have to use the tools and the documentation that's available to you. Then you need to develop and refine your processes. Better to do that proactively than to wait for an event and then realize, oh crap, that process doesn't work. I didn't have some of this established from the beginning. And it helps you ultimately better prepare for an incident down the road. And that preparedness is going to come into play into another best practice down the road here. But performing routine assessments of various types are going to help you with that educational factor. Performing threat hunting is going to help you exercise the type of approach you would have to IR, but in a non kind of critical manner. Incorporating threat intelligence, understanding the broader threat perspective and how you can leverage lessons learned from the field. And then more importantly, implementing training across the team. There are some capabilities available from both Dragos and CrowdStrike to help you in this endeavor. If you don't have the capabilities in-house or you just need some assistance, we do have both threat hunting or compromise assessments, which are very similar type services, with the Dragos one being focused on OT and then CrowdStrike obviously on the IT domain. And then obviously training and other types of assessment are in here as well. Best practice number 4. So collection management framework was a concept that was new to me when I joined Dragos, but actually something I really appreciate. Effective threat detection begins with having access to data and then being able to analyze that data. If you don't have that available to you, you're kind of fumbling in the dark. And this has traditionally been a problem across ICS. So reconcile your goals against the data that's available, and then you're going to start to understand where you need to make improvements on that gap analysis. What type of assets do I have? What type of data do I have? What do I want to do with this? Which teams are available to exercise it? So one step on that path is defining a collection management framework. So defining the data that's desirable for your team to be able to exercise that. And then you need to say, all right, well, can I gather that? Do I even have span and tap and management capabilities in my network infrastructure to support passive monitoring? Or do I need to deploy host agents? And that kind of, those questions need to be answered. Also, can I then implement that at scale? Do I have the appropriate tooling and capabilities to be able to do that across my whole organization? And then I need to test and validate that. I need to come up with some scenarios, simulate different things, and make sure it's effective and as I expect it. And then you need to reconcile, this is iterative, you're going to reconcile any collection gaps and continuously improve upon your collection management framework. The broader the collection, the less places that adversaries have to hide their malicious activity. And with regards to that collection, Dragos and CrowdStrike also have some tools that are available to help you. The Dragos platform is a technology platform designed for OT environments, CrowdStrike being heavily deployed at the endpoint level across enterprise. And then we can kind of hybrid some of those together using the app where we can take the Dragos detections, the indicators of compromise, and search through existing data sets you've already got collected through Falcon to help you understand if you've got any kind of early alarm warnings that you should be looking out for. So best practice number 5, preparedness, incident preparedness more specifically. You need to develop a response plan. You need to have a plan. You need to make sure it's applicable to many different scenarios and inclusive of all the appropriate stakeholders. Everyone knows their role. Everyone knows their responsibility. They know how to follow that and communicate that. And more importantly, you need to test and validate that. And that's part of that proactive activity. That's going to help you identify those gaps in a much low pressure environment than if you're dealing with an incident that you need to respond to. So defining your IR plan, drilling those with tabletop exercises, and actually going as far as to do real physical simulation live fire. One interesting fact there, in our year in review reports, we actually highlighted that 0% of the IR cases that we were working on actually had automated log aggregation. So everything we had to do from a forensic standpoint required that manual retrieval. And with regards to incident response, Dragos and CrowdStrike can assist in that regard as well. We do have a joint incident response retainer that will allow you to have one block of hours that covers both IT and OT. So you have one contract, and depending on what you need to focus that service on, Dragos and CrowdStrike will team to make sure that you have full coverage. Independently though, if you just wish to have an OT retainer, an IT retainer, again, Dragos and CrowdStrike have those capabilities as well. Then you can basically leverage the experienced team from Dragos and CrowdStrike to get you to where you need to until you have that capability in-house. So to wrap up here our session, I just want to highlight that your approach to OT needs to be different from IT. They are very different at the core, and therefore the way that you approach them and the way that you implement that needs to reflect that. It's also worth really highlighting that industrial threats are increasing, not just in frequency, we're seeing them more often, but the sophistication and the level that they're willing to go to. As I mentioned before, targeting safety systems really means that there is no area of OT that is off limits. The right solution requires the right combination of people, process, and technology. So make sure that you don't just invest in technology that's going to be the silver bullet that fix everything. You have the appropriate personnel to use the technology. You buy the technology that's appropriate level on your maturity, and your processes are going to incorporate both people and the technology side of things. You also have to make sure that the right balance depends on your current capabilities and your goals. So assessing your maturity and understanding where you are, where you need to be, and defining appropriate timeline. Don't try to boil the ocean. And then develop a plan that's realistic based upon what you have. If you don't have the capable team to use Intel, don't buy Intel. That makes sense. So develop the plan that's relative to where you are and where you want to be. And also leverage vendors and partners to fill any gaps you may have. We don't expect you to have this problem solved right from the get-go, but there are a number of sources of teaming that you can incorporate with different partners that you trust that are going to fill those gaps for you. And then finally, assume breach. Be proactive. Assume that you don't know that adversaries are in there and set out to prove that that's the case. And in many instances, we've actually discovered adversaries reside in enterprise networks and OT networks for well over a year while they conduct their reconnaissance. And that's necessary because industrial systems, if you're going to maliciously impact them, you need to have a good understanding of that. And it's not going to be built overnight. So assume breach and catch that presence early. And you'll be in a much better position than being reactive in that manner. I would like to thank you for your time today. I hope this has been informational for you. Here is my contact information if you wish to reach out. Feel free to reach out to anyone within the CrowdStrike or Dragos network or any of our traditional email aliases, and we'd love to talk to you. Thanks again for your time.